Thanks so much for joining us today. God wants to do so much for you and through you, and we'd love to hear about it. Take a moment to send your story to stories@parkerhill.org. And if you'd like to partner with us financially, you can do that by going to parkerhill.org/give and choose the giving option that works best for you. Well, thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoy today's message.
Hey, welcome everybody. Great to have you guys here at all three of our Parker Hill locations and some of you watching online. And if, by the way, you are watching this message online and you live within a 30-minute driving distance of one of our campuses, we'd love to have you join us in person next week for the full experience. But wherever you happen to be right now, great to have you with us as we begin a brand new teaching series. It is called The Comparison Trap. And for the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about our tendency, especially in the world we live in today, our tendency to look around and see what other people are doing and see how they're living and what they're buying, and then compare ourselves to them and allow the basis of our joy and security to be how we think we measure up to the people around us. That's the comparison trap, and it's kind of a sickness of the soul, really, because here's the problem with comparison. The problem with comparison is this: it can lead us to one of two destinations. It can either lead us to feeling superior to someone else or inferior to someone else. We can either feel better about ourselves or we can feel less than about ourselves, and neither one of those is honoring to God. So I can remember the first time I really experienced the comparison trap. I was probably 7 or 8 years old. I was in elementary school, and back when I went to elementary school, we used to do this thing called show and tell. I don't know if they do that in schools anymore today, but we did show and tell. And show and tell was where you had to bring something from home, and you would bring it into school on your assigned day to do show and tell, and you would talk about why it was important to you. And so, I was like 7 or 8 years old, and my day for show and tell was coming up, and I was feeling the pressure because I want to bring something that would impress and something I could talk about with enthusiasm. And at that age, my brothers and I, we were kind of into Hot Wheel cars. So we had a lot of Hot Wheels track, and we had a pretty good collection of cars. And so I decided to bring my 24-car Hot Wheels carrying case to show and tell. It was a few years old, and it was a little bit beat up, but come on, it was a 24-car carrying case. I knew it would impress. So I was all set for show and tell, starting to think about what I was going to say. But a few days before I was scheduled to do show and tell, one of my friends was scheduled to do show and tell. And when he came for show and tell, he brought this: a 48 car, plastic injection molded, brand new Hot Wheels carrying case. His name was Billy Walters. I still remember. I was one of 10 kids. He was an only child. His dad was the bank president. He had a brand new 48-car Hot Wheels carrying case, and I hated him. Because prior to that moment, I was pretty excited about my 24-car carrying case, and I was anticipating bringing that to show and tell and telling everybody all about it. But now my 24-car case seemed pretty pathetic in comparison. But here's the thing. I'd love to stand up here and tell you that I got over that whole comparison thing when I became an adult. But that's not the way it works, is it? I mean, even as adults, I think sometimes it gets amplified when we're adults. We still have this tendency to compare, to try to figure out how we're doing in relationship to everybody else, right? So you remodel your kitchen, and you spend thousands of dollars remodeling your kitchen. And you cook your meals in the garage for a month while you're remodeling your kitchen. And then it gets done, and you stand back and look at it, and it is beautiful, and it is awesome, and you are so thankful. Until a couple of months later when you visit your friend's house and you see their brand new kitchen, which looks like Joanna Gaines had been there. And suddenly your awesome kitchen is not so awesome anymore. Or, you're on Facebook and a friend of yours puts this long post on Facebook about how great her marriage is, followed by #blessed. And then you look up from that and you look across the living room at your husband, who is asleep in the recliner snoring with Doritos stains on his t-shirt. And you block that person on Facebook. Or, you take your family on a vacation, and it's a great vacation, but you get home from your vacation, and a few days later, you're on Instagram, and you discover that your buddy took his family on vacation, but it was a week longer and evidently cost about 5 times as much. and now your vacation seems pretty lame. And we do this all the time, don't we? We're constantly comparing to see how we measure up. Let me tell you the truth about comparison. The truth about comparison is this: the fastest way to ruin something special is to compare it to something else. The fastest way to ruin something special is to compare it to something else, because comparison is a killer. It'll kill your gratitude. It will kill your joy. Sometimes it will kill your relationships. In fact, there are lots of warnings in the Bible about this problem of comparison. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 14, it says this: a heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy, and envy always begins with comparison, but envy rots the bones. In other words, comparison is a poison in your spirit that will make it impossible for you to enjoy life and to be content. But not only does comparison affect our hearts, it can also do great damage to our relationships. James chapter 3 says it this way: wherever there is jealousy and selfish ambition. And jealousy means I see what you have, compare what I've got to what you've got, and I envy you. I'm jealous of you. Selfish ambition means always trying to climb whatever ladder you can climb to stay ahead of everybody else. And wherever there's jealousy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and evil of every kind. See, when we get caught in the comparison trap, it begins to damage our relationships. We just keep pushing our kids harder and harder so they can achieve what other kids are achieving, not for their benefit, but to make us look good, and that strains that relationship. Or there are people that you just don't like to hang out with, right? Because you'll never drive what they drive, and you'll never live where they live. And it just bothers you to be around them, not because of anything they do, but because of these comparisons that are constantly running through your mind. And you might even quietly and silently, rejoice when something goes wrong in their lives. You see, comparison can do great damage to our relationships as well, but not just our relationships with each other. It can even damage our relationship with God. Psalm 73, which was written by Asaph, who was one of the spiritual leaders in the nation of Israel. He was actually a worship leader. He said this: truly God is good to those who are pure in heart. He says, I know that in my head. But as for me, my feet had almost stumbled, my steps had nearly slipped. In other words, he's talking about his journey of faith. His feet had almost slipped. He had also almost slipped away from his relationship with God. And here's why: for I was envious of the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. So he looks around, Asaph does, at the world around him. He compares his life to the lives of other people, many of whom were wicked, who had rejected God, and he can't understand it. He can't understand why God would bless him, and it begins to really even affect his relationship with God. And we do this sometimes too, don't we? God, I can't understand why you gave them that job, or that house, or that body, or that marriage. I can't understand, God, why you gave it to them and didn't give it to me. And it can even begin to affect our relationship with God because we think he has not treated us the way that we deserve. And so this whole problem of comparison, I'll say it one more time, the fastest way to ruin something special is to compare it to something else. It ruins our hearts. It ruins our relationships with each other and with God. And you know what? I think a lot of us know this, but here's the big challenge that we face. We live in a time in history when it is easier to compare our lives with the lives of other people than it has ever been before at any other point in history. It is so easy, right? 200 years ago, you lived on a farm with your spouse and your 3 kids, and you went to town for supplies once a month. And so you didn't have that many opportunities to compare your lifestyle with somebody else's lifestyle. It just didn't happen. But today, we live in an entirely different world. In fact, today, because of technology and social media, we can compare our lives with each other's lives 24/7 right there in the palm of our hands, can't we? And this is the way we live, in a world of constant comparison. I'll give you one example. Like, one of my favorites is Pinterest. Pinterest. How many of you have ever used Pinterest? Proudly put your hand up, all the Pinterest users. Yes, I have too. Some of you may not even know what it is. You may not be aware of what Pinterest is. So let me give you a definition. This is actually from Wikipedia. Here's what Pinterest is: a visual discovery tool that people use to collect ideas for their different projects and interests. There is where they get Pinterest. People create and share collections called boards of visual bookmarks called pins that they use to do things like plan trips and projects, organize events, or save articles and recipes. So Pinterest is basically a great big, online scrapbook is what it is. So that's the actual definition of Pinterest. Let me give you an alternative definition. Pinterest is a visually oriented social media platform strategically designed to give you constant reminders that your kids are not as well dressed as other kids, your decor is outdated, the pictures you take are comparatively artless, you did a terrible job planning your own wedding, you live a monotonous, tedious, painfully dull existence, unlike everyone else in the world whose life is always awesome. That's what Pinterest is for some people, especially if you hang out there too often, because that is how it makes you feel. Because you're comparing your life to everybody else's best version of their life. In fact, there's another website that I really like. It's called PinterestFails.com. PinterestFail.com. And what this is, it's a website where people go who've been on Pinterest and they saw an idea and then they tried to do it themselves and they shared the results of what happened when they tried to do what they saw on Pinterest. And it's really kind of funny. I'll give you a few examples. Like you can go on Pinterest and you can find this thing called clothespin painting, where you take a clothespin, put a cotton ball on it, and then you put some paint out for your precious little children, and they make artwork that you can put on your refrigerator, and it's really great. But then here's what happens when you try it with your kids right here. That's the reality of it. Or maybe, you're cooking Easter breakfast and you want to make some Easter bunny pancakes. So, you go on Pinterest and you find the picture and you find the instructions to do this. But when you try it in your kitchen, it turns out a little bit more like this right there. It really fails in comparison. Or maybe you want to take, a really cute picture of your 3 kids. And so, of course, you go on Pinterest so you can find, a great example of how to take a great picture of your kids. And so, but the problem is with your camera, your photo skills, and your kids, here's how it turns out in your house. It looks like that. And I like PinterestFail.com because it makes me feel better about myself. See. Now, I'm not down on social media. I'm not here to pick on Pinterest. In fact, it's not even about the medium. It's about a mindset. It's about this constant need to compare. And the problem is that so oftentimes we're comparing our real life with somebody else's ideal picture of their life. Somebody once said it this way: a lot of our insecurity comes from the fact that we compare our behind-the-scenes footage to somebody else's highlight reel. And it's so easy to do in this culture today. And so with all of that comparison, it begins to steal our joy and ruin our relationships, and it drives so much financial pressure in our lives. And today, I want to show you an example from Scripture of somebody who fell into the comparison trap and the damage that comparison can do. And then at the end, I want to talk a little bit about how we can avoid stepping into the comparison trap. So I want to focus your attention today on 1 Samuel chapter 18. If you have an app on your phone, a Bible app, you can bring that up or just open up a regular Bible. 1 Samuel chapter 18, it describes the relationship between 2 men, Saul and David. And just to give you a little bit of context, Saul at this point in history was the king of the nation of Israel. And David, as you may know, was a shepherd boy who had stepped up and confronted an enemy giant by the name of Goliath. And with nothing but a sling and a stone, David takes down Goliath. That happens just before chapter 18. Chapter 17, here's what it says. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. And David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. And so David, essentially, he sets his nation free from oppression. He rescues his nation. He literally saves the life of the king, King Saul. And King Saul is so grateful for this that he allows David to live in the king's palace for the rest of his life. Chapter 18, verse 2, it says this: from that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return home to his family because he valued David so much. He wanted to keep him close by, essentially as part of his family. And then as time goes by, Saul, sees the potential in David, and he keeps giving him more and more leadership opportunities. Verse 5 goes on to say this: whatever Saul sent him to do, David did it so successfully that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. And so up until this point, Saul and David seem to have a really good relationship. But not long after this, Saul's admiration for David begins to morph into something very dark and very destructive, because he begins to make comparisons. And those comparisons begin to make him very, very envious. Let me keep reading here, verse 6. When the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing. As they danced, they sang, "Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands." Now, that song contained a little bit of poetic license. David had not really killed at that point tens of thousands. He did kill one really big guy, and that was a big accomplishment. But they make up this song, and Saul was very bothered by this. And at this point, from this point forward, there is a change in their relationship. And Saul begins to see David as a threat. And his constant comparison leads him to a point of deep envy and deep jealousy. It eventually destroys their relationship, and it eventually destroys Saul's heart. And so I want to dig a little bit deeper into some of the details here in 1 Samuel chapter 18 and show you 3 indications that you may be moving toward the comparison trap. 3 indications. And the first one is this: when I start resenting what I should be celebrating. When I start resenting what I should be celebrating. There's a word that shows up several times in 1 Samuel chapter 18, and it's a word that describes David's career trajectory. Let me read 3 verses, see if you can pick up on the word that's repeated here. Verse 5, whatever Saul sent him to do, David did it so successfully that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. Verse 15, when Saul saw how successful David was, Saul was afraid of him. Verse 30, the Philistine commanders continued to go out to battle, and as often as they did, David met with more success than the rest of Saul's officers. What's the word that keeps coming up in association with David? Success, success, success. And see, Saul looks at that. And Saul could have looked at David's success and he could have celebrated that. Saul could have said to himself, you know what? This is a good thing, because someday God may raise up a leader to replace me, and maybe God is now in the process of raising up a leader in this young man, and perhaps he will make him the leader so that I can hand off my leadership responsibilities to someone who I know will take good care of God's people. But Saul does not think that way. He does not celebrate this victory. Instead, comparison creeps into his heart, and he begins to resent David. In fact, go back to verse 7 again. As they danced, they sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." There's no tune in the Bible, so I had to guess at that part. I envy those who can sing. And at this point, Saul could have said, yeah, step up here, David. Hey, let's all give David a hand. Isn't this young guy something else? Let's celebrate what David has done. Let me sing along with you. But no, he doesn't do that. Look at verse 8. Saul was very angry. This refrain galled him. They've credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. This should have been a moment of celebration, but instead of celebrating this victory, Saul was focusing on his reputation, his future, his power, and resenting the victor. A few years ago, I was on vacation. My family and I were at a beach house down in North Carolina. And one afternoon, I just went out walking on the beach, just went for a stroll. And as I was walking down the beach in this particular direction that I was walking, I kid you not, every guy that I walked by, this is no exaggeration, every guy I walked by was incredibly physically fit. I mean, 6-pack abs, bulging biceps, 32-inch waist, 0% body fat, every single guy I walked by. And I was like, the farther I walked, the more depressed I got. And I get back to the beach house, and I'm like, man, I am a loser. Like, those guys must spend half their day working out. I could probably look like that too if I spent half my day working out, but no, I've got to help God save the world, so I'm comparing myself to these guys and feeling pretty bad about myself. And then I discovered something later that day, that our beach house was right next to Camp Lejeune, which is a Marine Corps base. I was walking on a Marine Corps base like they were all Marines. And here's my point. I could have been celebrating the fact that these are the guys who protect our country instead of resenting the fact that they're in better shape than I was. And that's what Saul was doing. He's resenting this young man who had so much courage and bravery and potential leadership capacity. He's resenting him instead of celebrating. That's the first sign that you're starting to drift into the comparison trap. Second indication that you're starting to drift into the comparison trap is this: when gratitude for what I have is replaced by the fear of what I might miss. When gratitude for what I have is replaced by the fear of what I might miss. I want to point out another theme that comes up over and over again here in 1 Samuel chapter 18. See if you can pick up the word. Saul was afraid of David. When Saul saw how successful David was, he was afraid of him. Saul became still more afraid of him. What's the word that comes up over and over in Saul's heart? He was afraid. And he didn't need to be afraid of David. David was very loyal to the king, very loyal to the nation of Israel, very aware of the fact that the king was God's anointed. In fact, later on in this story, David has a chance to actually kill Saul, and he refuses to do it. You know, Saul didn't need to fear David, and here's the thing. I don't think he feared David personally. Do you know what he feared? He feared for his own future. He looked at this young man who had great leadership capacity, whose God's hand was evidently upon him, and he feared what that would mean for his own future and for his position and for his power, which is so tragic because at this point in history, Saul had already been the king of Israel for about 30 years, and God had done some amazing things through him and was continuing to bless him, and God's hand was still on him. But rather than being grateful for his role in leading the nation of Israel, he began to be afraid of what he might miss in the future. I think the best way to illustrate this is with one of Aesop's fables. It's called The Dog and His Reflection. And it goes like this. A dog to whom the butcher had thrown a bone was hurrying home with his prize as fast as he could go. As he crossed a narrow footbridge, he happened to look down and saw himself reflected in the quiet water as if in a mirror. But the greedy dog thought he saw a real dog carrying a bone much bigger than his own. If he had stopped to think, he would have known better, but instead of thinking, he dropped his bone and sprang at the dog in the river, only to find himself swimming for dear life to reach the shore. At last, he managed to scramble out, and as he stood sadly thinking about the good bone he had lost, he realized what a stupid dog he had been. And that was King Saul. He was so focused on what he was seeing in David, so preoccupied by that he couldn't be grateful for what God had already given to him, and he eventually lost everything. Let me ask you a question. What is the bone in your life? What is it that you're seeing out there that you want so badly that you can't enjoy what God has already given to you? What is that possession, that relationship, that title that you're seeking for? Because one of the tragedies of getting caught up in the comparison trap is that it steals our gratitude and our joy in the moment. Like you can't enjoy the house you're living in because you're thinking about the upgrade that you want to get next. You can't really appreciate your kids and their accomplishments because you're always thinking about the next benchmark you want them to meet. You can't really do a good job at the job that you're in because you're always thinking about the next job that you hope to find someday. Gratitude is lost in your pursuit of something else. Here's the third thing. Not only do I start resenting what I should be celebrating, not only do I lose gratitude or have gratitude replaced by the fear of what I might miss, but number three, and this is so strange and so dark, but it's true about the heart of us as human beings. When someone else's downfall becomes the source of my joy, then I'm really slipping into the comparison trap. You skip ahead to verse 20 here because the story of David and Saul at this point gets very complicated because Saul's daughter actually falls in love with David. Now, Saul's daughter, Michal, was in love with David, and when they told Saul about it, he was pleased, which is very odd to me because Saul was already jealous of David. You would think he wouldn't be pleased, and so you read this and you think, probably he's always wanted his daughter to be able to marry, a hero of the nation, a man of great character and courage, and so he's really pleased. He's excited that David is now going to be his son-in-law. No, that's not what's happening. Keep reading here, verse 21. I will give her to him, he thought, so that she may be a snare to him, and so that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. You know what that means? I think I'll let him marry my daughter because that will put a bigger target on his back. Because once the Philistines find out that he's actually my son-in-law, because they want to hurt me, they'll go after him. And maybe if he marries my daughter, he'll die sooner. Like, welcome to the family, David. Hope it kills you. I mean, you think you got some bad in-laws. They aren't that bad in comparison. See, the comparison and the jealousy and the envy have gone so deeply into his heart that this is the man that he had become. But before we're too hard on Saul, let's be honest. Has there ever been a time when you heard some bad news about someone that you envy, and there was just a teeny, tiny scrap of joy in your heart over that? Have you ever felt that way? Oh, a tree fell on his brand new car and smashed it. I feel so bad, you know. She didn't look as good at the beach this year as she did last year. No, she didn't. She really didn't. I heard their kids had to be taken out of private school because they couldn't afford the private school anymore. Like, the human heart can be really dark, can't it? We can sometimes rejoice in someone else's failure because we're in this comparison trap. And so let me tell you how the story ends. So things just get worse from there. And David is actually pursued by Saul to the point where David has to flee his family and his home and just flee for his life. And he becomes a fugitive. And for about the next 7 or 10 years, David was on the run, running from this king whose heart had been corrupted by comparison. So what do you do about that? How do we keep ourselves from stepping into the comparison trap? Let me just go back into this story a little bit and talk about 3 strategies that help us avoid the comparison trap. And the first thing is this: find your identity in the right place. Find your identity in the right place, because I think there's a very, very important question, and it's a very simple question that every single one of us has to answer. Crucial question, and it's this: who or what is going to define my value? Who or what is going to define my value? What is going to be my reference point for knowing that I'm okay? Because we all go through life like with these mirrors that we look into to define our worth and our value and our identity. Sometimes it's the mirror of our career or our possessions or athletic achievements or academic achievements. For Saul, he found his identity, he found his value in his position as a king. And when he sensed that was threatened, when he saw a young man who had tremendous leadership potential who might someday replace him, Saul freaks out because his identity, his worth was found in that position. And see, what happens to us so often, those of us even who are followers of Christ, is that our sin nature pulls us away from the heart of God and pulls us toward all the things of this world, and we seek to fill an internal need with all these external things. There's no external accomplishment or possession or blessing, no amount of money, nothing that will quench the spiritual longing that we have. We can never find our identity in those things. They're too fragile, too fleeting, and they don't work anyway because you just keep needing more of them. Which is why St. Augustine in the 4th century said this. He said, "You made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you." And we need to understand this, that there's nothing in this world that can satisfy the spiritual restlessness that exists in every human heart. You'll never have a perfect relationship. You'll never have perfect kids. You'll never find a perfect vacation that you went on. You'll never have a perfect home. And we're constantly, unfortunately, seeking external things to fulfill an internal emptiness. And you can try, and you can try, and you can try. But there is nothing outside of a relationship with your Creator made possible by the death of Christ. There is nothing else in this world that will ultimately satisfy that emptiness. And until you get that, and until you embrace that truth, you're just going to compare and chase and compare and chase and compare and chase, and it's just emptiness. That's all it is. So number one, find your identity in the right place. Number two, celebrate the success of someone else. And more specifically, celebrate the success of someone that you're tempted to envy. So instead of resenting the goodness of God in the lives of other people, You rejoice in the goodness of God in the lives of other people, even people that you don't think deserve what God has given to them. That's why it says here in Romans chapter 12, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. Rejoice with those who are rejoicing, even if you don't feel like it. Because the thing that breaks the power of comparison is when you celebrate the very people that you're tempted to envy, and you celebrate them out loud, not just in your heart. So your next door neighbor gets that brand new car, the car that you wish you could buy, that you cannot afford to buy, and you walk over to your next door neighbor, and you say, man, that is a sweet ride. That is an awesome car. I am so happy for you. And if you ever need somebody just to drive it, just to keep it warmed up, you just let me know. If you're jealous of your sister because, she looks better in that new dress than maybe you do, you just say, man, you look so good in that. You look so attractive in that. I'm so happy for you. Somebody else gets the promotion in your office that you wish that you could have gotten. And so you write them a note or you send them an email and you say, congratulations on the promotion. I'm sure you'll do a good job in that position. If I can ever help you, let me know. Or, somebody posts something on Facebook or Instagram that you're tempted to compare yourself with and really feel inferior about. And instead of just, blocking them, you give them a thumbs up or a nice comment. And you say, I'm so glad you had such an awesome vacation. The third one this year, you are very fortunate. I'm so happy for you. You rejoice with those who rejoice. A little bit of self-disclosure. There was a young guy who was a part of this church, and then he eventually got a degree in theology, and he went and started a church, not very far from here. And things went really well for him, and the church was growing like crazy, and they were doing some great stuff in the community, and I was very excited for him and very excited about what was happening in the lives of people who were part of that church. And then I noticed over time I would sometimes go on their Facebook page, which had more likes than our Facebook page at the time, and I would look at some of the comments there, and I began to do this really silly, crazy thing, because I'm a pastor, and we're like on the same team, right? And I would begin to think, okay, because he's like 25 years younger than me, I would begin to compare where I was at that age with where he is at that age, and it's just this really kind of strange, odd thing, and I would find myself doing this. So I decided, you know what? I'm just going to every so often send him an email and tell him he's doing a great job. And so, hey, I heard your message online. Great job on that. I hear great things about the church. Keep it up. And we have a great relationship. We help him out all the time. But, sometimes the one thing that you have to do if you want to push the comparison trap away is you've just got to rejoice with those who rejoice. You've just got to celebrate with somebody else, and not just celebrate what happens to you. And finally, last one, consistently express gratitude. The scriptures say it this way: give thanks in all circumstances, even in your circumstances that you wish were somebody else's circumstances. Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. Because here's why this is so important, because comparison always looks at others and says, why them? Why did they get that? I think I deserve what they have. Gratitude kind of flips the script, and gratitude says this: why me? Why did I get this? I don't know if I deserve what I have, but God, thank you so much for it. And so consistently express gratitude. If you got kids, you're raising kids, teach them to be grateful so they don't grow up to be entitled adults. Make it a habit around your dinner table to just share one thing that everybody is thankful for about that day that happened. Keep a gratitude journal. Count your blessings. When things get really tough, just stop and say, yeah, but look at how God has blessed me. Because that totally changes your perspective. And see, whenever I start to make some of those unhealthy comparisons with other people, maybe somebody that I went to high school with who chose a different career path, who's just making loads of money and actually has weekends off, and I'm like tempted to compare, or somebody, I know who's pastoring a church in a different part of the country, and, things are going really well for them, and you try to make those comparisons. I just have to stop, and I have to say, you know what, God, thank you. I serve in a great church, and I get to serve you full time. and you're doing amazing things in this church, and we've got just an incredible staff, and I've got a beautiful, loving wife, and I've got really close friends, and I've got 2 amazing kids, and beyond everything else, I've got a relationship with my Heavenly Father that gives me purpose in this life and hope for the life to come. I mean, what more do I need? And every once in a while, when that spirit of comparison just begins to creep up into your heart, you just got to stop and intentionally express gratitude, because I believe that gratitude and comparison cannot coexist in the same heart.